3,000 people boarded planes for a match that did not exist yet. No trophy on the line, no official score, not even a guarantee that the person they were flying to see would step on the court for more than 20 minutes. So why would anyone empty their bank account, burn a vacation day, cross an ocean, and sit in a stadium seat just to watch a practice session? That question alone should stop you right here, because the answer is stranger than you think. And by the end of this, you will understand why grown men who have beaten Grand Slam champions are now saying, out loud, on camera, that they are not the reason the crowd is screaming anymore. Somebody else is. Her name is Alex. Remember that name, because in 12 months it went from unknown to unavoidable. And nobody, not her coaches, not her rivals, not even the tournament organizers can fully explain how it happened this fast. Let's rewind. Not to New York, not yet. Rewind further, to a version of Alex that barely anyone outside the sport could pick out of a lineup. She was not selling out arenas. She was not trending. She was doing the unglamorous, invisible work every unknown athlete does, chasing wild cards, chasing rankings, chasing a seat at a table that kept threatening to stay closed. If you had told her 1 year ago that a doubles exhibition featuring her would fill 23,000 seats before the real tournament even began, she probably would have laughed and gone back to practice. That is how insane this is. And it starts, of all places, in Toronto. Nobody circled Toronto on a calendar. It was supposed to be a routine stop, another line on a schedule, a young player gaining experience against bigger names. And then the stands started filling in a way nobody had planned for. Flags that had nothing to do with Canada. Chants that had nothing to do with the home crowd. Colors that told you exactly where these people's hearts actually were. 12,000 plus, and climbing every round. Here's the part that should give you chills. Tennis crowds are trained to be quiet. Applause between points. Silence during the rally. Golf-level etiquette. But around Alex, that unwritten rule started dissolving. The silence cracked. The noise got louder and weirder and more personal, like something you would hear at a football match, not a tennis court. And Alex noticed. She felt it before anyone officially reported it. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Toronto was not the peak. Toronto was the warning shot. Because a crowd showing up for an underdog is one thing. A crowd showing up for a winner is something else entirely. So the real question became, what happens the moment she actually starts beating the players she is supposed to lose to? Washington gave the answer, and it detonated everything. Not a nice run. Not a respectable finish. A title, her first one. And she didn't win it against a nobody. She won it by taking down a top 3 player on the planet, live, in front of a crowd that had believed in her long before there was any proof to believe in. Now there was proof. Now the story flipped from hope to evidence, and evidence changes people. It changes expectations. Before Washington, the question floating around locker rooms was simple. Can she compete? After Washington, the question got heavier. How far can this actually go? And for the players unlucky enough to be drawn against her, an even more uncomfortable question started forming in their heads. What does it feel like to walk onto a court knowing that thousands of strangers have already decided you're the villain in someone else's story? One opponent, a seasoned professional who has faced hostile crowds before, admitted something rare. The noise wasn't just loud. It was disorienting. It bent the psychology of the match itself. Every big point detonated a wave of sound. Neutral ground stopped existing. And here's the part that makes this so hard to categorize. Even the players getting steamrolled by the noise admitted there was something magnetic about it. Something almost enjoyable, like being caught in a storm you can't help but respect. The fans were not spectating anymore. They had become part of the scoreboard. But hold on, because right when the story seems to be building toward an unstoppable, uninterrupted rise, something happens that should have ended the whole phenomenon. Cincinnati. 3rd round. A brutal marathon battle that swung back and forth until the night swallowed the clock whole. And she lost. Momentum gone. Story over, right? A losing player usually empties a stadium in minutes. People check their phones, grab their jackets, beat the parking lot traffic. That is what normally happens. That is not what happened here. They stayed. Past midnight, they stayed. flags still raised in a building that had every logical reason to be half empty. Every time she clawed back a single point in a match she could not possibly still win, the crowd reacted like the entire outcome could be rewritten by sheer noise alone. It couldn't. They knew it couldn't, and they stayed anyway. Sit with that for a second, because this is the moment the story stopped being about winning and quietly became about something far more dangerous for every future opponent: loyalty. A crowd that only shows up when you're winning is a crowd of fair-weather admirers. A crowd that stays when you're losing, deep into the night, watching a battle they know is already lost. That is not a fan base anymore. That is an attachment. That is identity. They weren't tracking a scoreline. They were tracking her. And once that bond exists, it does not shrink the next time the lights get brighter. It grows. Which brings us to the place where all of this was always heading, whether anyone admitted it or not. New York. Flushing Meadows. The loudest, most unforgiving stage in the sport. And this time, the phenomenon didn't wait politely for the main draw to start. It arrived early, uninvited, overwhelming, at what was supposed to be a low-stakes exhibition. 23,000 seats. Not mostly full. Not impressively full. Completely unmistakably full. The kind of crowd you expect for a final, not a warm-up. And once again, the gravity of the entire building bent toward one 21-year-old who, a year earlier, was still fighting just to get into these rooms at all. But this match carried an extra layer of tension, something personal buried underneath the spectacle. Her opponent across the net had beaten her twice before. Twice. Not a statistic, a debt. Unfinished business sitting in the back of her mind every time she bounced the ball before serving. So this wasn't only a test of whether the crowd's energy could translate into something real on a Grand Slam stage. It was a chance to erase a ghost. And in front of a sold-out house holding its breath, she did exactly that. She won. Just like that, 2 painful losses stopped being the story. They became history, buried under a single deafening roar that didn't sound like the reaction to an exhibition. It sounded like the reaction to something being settled, something personal, something the crowd had been carrying alongside her the entire time. And that's when the pattern became too obvious to explain away as coincidence. Toronto revealed it, Washington amplified it, Cincinnati tested its limits. New York confirmed it was real, permanent, and still growing. But here's a question almost nobody thought to ask until this exact moment. What does it feel like to stand 2 feet away from someone when an entire stadium belongs to them and not to you? Because Alex wasn't alone out there. She had a doubles partner, and this wasn't some unproven rookie riding shotgun. This was an established, decorated professional, a former Grand Slam semifinalist, an Olympic medalist, someone who, on paper, should have been the bigger name in that partnership, the one drawing eyes, the one crowds came for. Instead, he said something almost nobody in an individual sport ever admits out loud. He wasn't generating the electricity in that building. He was standing inside someone else's storm, just trying to keep up with it. Think about how upside down that is. Tennis runs on ego, on rankings, on resumes stacked like armor. And here was a decorated veteran essentially conceding the atmosphere to a 21-year-old partner because he had already witnessed what happened in Canada, already felt the walls shake, and he knew walking into New York that the storm wasn't just coming back. It was coming back bigger, and there was nowhere to hide from it. That admission matters more than people realize, because it proves this thing has stopped being contained to Alex alone. Opponents feel it. Teammates feel it. Broadcasters feel it. Tournament directors quietly recalculating court assignments feel it. And somewhere underneath all of it, Alex has to feel it too, every single day, in a way that never shows up on a stat sheet. There's a word for what builds underneath fame like this, and it isn't excitement. It's weight. Alex has talked about that weight directly, and it isn't the ordinary pre-match nerves every athlete deals with. It's something heavier, something stranger. The pressure of knowing that thousands of people have wrapped their pride, their identity, their emotional Tuesday night around whether you win or lose a tennis match you didn't ask them to care this much about. Picture it. You walk out to serve. and the first thing you see isn't the baseline. It's a wall of your country's colors staring back at you. You hear your own name chanted before the first ball is even struck. You know with total certainty that one clean winner will trigger an explosion, and one unforced error will land on thousands of people who desperately, achingly want you to succeed. That is not ordinary pressure. That is love, weaponized into expectation, whether anyone intended it that way or not. And here is the contradiction that makes this story impossible to flatten into something simple. Alex has described this exact feeling as heavy, and in almost the same breath as fun, chaotic, surreal, overwhelming. In the best and worst sense at once. Both things are true simultaneously, and that tension, that refusal to be one clean emotion, is exactly why this story keeps pulling people back in. Because the same crowd noise that lifts her into moments she couldn't reach alone is the same crowd noise that could one day crush her if a loss ever comes at the wrong time. On the wrong stage, in front of the wrong amount of hope. Which means the real story from here forward isn't really about the fans anymore. It's about whether she can control the very thing she built. Because eventually, support curdles into expectation, and expectation becomes its own opponent, one that doesn't show up on a bracket and can't be scouted on film. Former doubles legends, players who have spent decades reading momentum inside packed arenas, have already said it plainly. Beating her now isn't just about beating her forehand or her return of serve. It's about surviving the environment she carries onto the court with her, an environment that punishes opponents psychologically before the match even tightens. What happens the instant an opponent strikes a clean winner and the building goes dead silent? What happens the second she wins one gritty contested point and 20,000 people detonate at once? What happens in the final, suffocating moments of a close match, when one player desperately needs stillness and the other has an entire stadium supplying oxygen? At that point, you are no longer just playing Alex. You are playing inside an atmosphere that belongs to her, one you cannot train for, cannot simulate, and cannot silence. And that is exactly why this phenomenon resists easy measurement. Rankings can be measured, titles can be counted, attendance numbers can be printed in a report the next morning. But how do you put a number on the psychological gut punch of walking into a stadium and instantly realizing the emotional momentum already belongs to the person across the net from you? You can't chart that. You can't graph it. But everyone who has stood on that baseline against her can feel it, immediately, in their chest. And the timing of all this makes it even harder to dismiss as noise, because the results are climbing right alongside the crowds, not lagging behind them. A career-high ranking inside the top 20. 7 wins over top 10 opponents in a single season. A deep statement-making run at Wimbledon. A maiden tour-level title earned by beating elite competition, not backing into it. This is not a manufactured storyline being propped up by hype alone. The fans aren't cheering for a promise anymore. They're reacting to proof, fresh proof, delivered tournament after tournament, each result adding more fuel to a fire that already looked uncontrollable. And now all of that momentum is walking straight into the loudest room in the sport, the US Open, the biggest stage tennis has to offer, filled with former world number ones, Grand Slam champions, home crowd American favorites who should, by every logical measure, be soaking up the spotlight themselves. And somehow, again and again, that spotlight keeps sliding sideways, drifting toward a 21-year-old who was fighting for wild cards this time last year. That is the actual transformation happening here, and it is easy to miss if you're only watching the scoreboard. It isn't simply that she got better. Plenty of players get better. It's that people started expecting her to be better, publicly, loudly, with thousands of dollars in plane tickets already spent on that expectation. An expectation, real expectation, is one of the most dangerous forces in sports, because support during a winning streak is effortless. Anyone can cheer when the outcome is already trending in their favor. The real test, the one that actually reveals something, comes the moment things stop going according to plan. When the first set slips away, when an opponent finally solves the puzzle everyone else has been failing to solve all year. When the score tightens and the crowd's energy shifts from celebration to something closer to held breath. Watching, waiting, silently pleading. That is the moment that will define whatever comes next. Because it forces a question no ranking, no seed number, no highlight reel can answer in advance. Can she carry that crowd without letting the crowd carry her instead? Can she use 20,000 strangers as fuel without ever becoming trapped underneath the weight of what they expect her to deliver? Can she still be, underneath all of it, the same relentless player who once had to fight tooth and nail just to get a seat at this table? Now that thousands of people are demanding she produce something extraordinary on command, nobody knows the answer yet. Not her coaches, not her rivals, not the analysts breaking down every match frame by frame. And that uncertainty, that total absence of a guaranteed ending, is exactly why this story refuses to sit still. This isn't a retrospective about a superstar looking back fondly on the moment she made it. This is happening in real time, unfinished, unresolved, live. The crowds keep getting bigger. The expectations keep getting heavier. The stages keep getting brighter. And every single tournament carries the very real possibility of rewriting this entire narrative overnight, in either direction. Maybe she wins again, and the phenomenon grows past anything tennis has seen from a player this young in years. Maybe she loses, and the crowd stays anyway, past midnight again, proving Cincinnati wasn't a fluke, but a preview. Maybe the pressure eventually becomes too heavy for even her to carry. Or maybe, and this is the possibility that should genuinely terrify every player left in her path, she discovers exactly how to convert all of that pressure into raw, controlled power. Nobody can predict which version of this story is coming next. But look at what has already happened, undeniably, in front of everyone. 3,000 people crossing an ocean for a session that wasn't even a real match. Stadiums in cities that have nothing to do with her home turning into something close to a home game anyway. A brutal loss that somehow kept a crowd in their seats past midnight instead of sending them home early. An exhibition that generated the noise of a championship final. A decorated veteran partner openly admitting he was riding a wave that belonged to someone else. Opponents feeling the atmosphere shift before the first serve is even struck. This has stopped being a simple fan base because a fan base watches, and this follows. A fan base cheers when you win, and this stays when you lose. A fan base buys a ticket, and this crosses oceans without blinking. And maybe that's the real reason this keeps getting bigger every single time it feels like it has already peaked. Because underneath all of it, this was never only about tennis. It's about what happens when enough people watch a young athlete fight her way into rooms nobody was sure she'd ever enter, and quietly decide they are walking through those doors right beside her, whatever it costs, however far it takes them. So as the tournament pushes deeper, as the rounds get more dangerous and the stadiums get louder and the margin for error shrinks to almost nothing, the real question was never whether she would have support. That question has already been answered definitively in 3 different cities and counting. The flags are already there. The chants are already there. The belief is already sitting in the stands, waiting. The only question left, the one nobody can answer for her, is what she chooses to do with all of it. Because eventually the noise fades, the stadium lights dim, the flags come down, and she is left standing completely alone at the baseline with one ball in her hand and one impossible question in her head. Can she still be exactly who she's always been, now that everyone around her needs her to be something more? That, more than any scoreline, is the real test waiting in the next chapter. Because she has already proven she can build a crowd, and she has already proven she can make people believe. What's left, the only thing left, is whether she can carry that belief without ever letting it become the very thing that breaks her stride. A year ago, almost nobody outside the sport was asking how far this could go. Now people are crossing oceans just to watch her take the next step. And if the last 12 months have proven anything at all, it's this. Every single time the world assumes it has finally seen the ceiling of this phenomenon, she finds a way to make everyone look up again. Bigger crowds, heavier expectations, brighter lights, and somehow, impossibly, the story just keeps getting louder from here. Which means the real question was never whether this was real. Everyone in those stadiums already knows it's real. The only question left standing is how far it can actually go. Because if the last year is any kind of preview, betting against her, and against the thousands of people who have already decided they are not going anywhere, might be the single riskiest bet left in the entire tournament.